A sputtering start. The venerable sedan issued a final dry rattle, a sound that resonated through the floorboards and up Adrian's spine. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as the engine offered one last pathetic gasp before succumbing to an abrupt, total silence. Only the gentle tick of cooling metal and the distant urban hum remained. Adrian's stomach clenched. He'd known this old warhorse was on its last gasp, but he'd envisioned a more theatrical exit, a grand finale. Instead, it had chosen the most prosaic of finales, right before the sprawling, oil-stained facade of Luke's Fix-It. The irony was not lost on him. He exhaled a slow, fogging sigh into the cool morning air. His gaze settled on the shop's sign, a hand-painted tableau featuring a cartoon wrench wielding a screwdriver. The bold, slightly chipped letters, though, conveyed an undeniable welcome. It felt like a place where integrity was tangible, where grease streaks were emblems of honest toil. Yet, the prospect of engaging with a stranger, especially about such a personal calamity as a dead car, tightened a familiar knot in his chest. Adrian cherished his solitude, the quiet predictability of his routines. This was decidedly off-script. Before he could even contemplate a restart, the heavy garage door of Luke's Fix-It groaned open. A man emerged, backlit by the dim interior, a strong silhouette against the industrial twilight. He moved with an easy, confident stride, the gait of someone utterly self-assured. As he stepped into the nascent sunlight, Adrian took him in. Faded denim, a grease-smudged tee stretched taut across his frame, and a worn leather apron. Dark hair was pulled back from a strong, tanned face. A smudge of oil, a defiant accent above his left eyebrow. He exuded competence, and surprisingly, an approachable air despite the rugged exterior. The mechanic's eyes, an astonishing blue, met Adrian's through the windshield. A warm, unforced smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. He lifted a hand in a casual wave, then began to cross the cracked asphalt towards Adrian's car. A flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in Adrian. Not dread, but a softening of his long-held tension. The mechanic's presence felt anchoring, like a sturdy oak in a sudden squall. A blush crept up his neck, surprising him with its unexpected warmth. He fumbled with the door handle and pushed it open, stepping out. "Morning." The mechanic's voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. He stopped a few feet away, hands settled on his hips, his gaze sweeping over Adrian's ancient sedan. "Looks like you've hit a snag, huh?" Adrian nodded, a little too quickly. "Yeah, she just quit. Right here." He gestured vaguely at the inanimate vehicle, a wave of embarrassment washing over him. The car felt like an extension of himself, and at this moment, that extension was profoundly failing. The mechanic chuckled, a sound both warm and genuine. "Happens to the best of 'em. Don't you fret. I'm Luke Miller. This is my shop." He extended a large calloused hand. Adrian took it, his own slender fingers feeling almost delicate in Luke's firm grip. Adrian Finch." The contact was fleeting, yet Adrian felt a surprising current pass between them, a warmth that lingered even after they disengaged. He quickly shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling awkward. "It's an old car. I probably pushed it too far." Luke simply nodded, his expression understanding. He bent, peered under the hood, then straightened. "Mind if I take a look? See if it's a quick patch, or if we're talking major surgery?" "Please," Adrian practically whispered, stepping back to afford Luke space. He watched as Luke circled the car, his movements economical and precise. The hood sprang open with a practiced ease, and Adrian caught a whiff of hot oil and gasoline, laced with something metallic and clean. Luke vanished beneath the raised hood, his broad back facing Adrian. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the occasional clinking of tools and Luke's soft grunts of concentration. Adrian found himself observing the rhythmic sway of Luke's shoulders, the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt. There was a quiet strength about him, an aura of competence that Adrian found strangely comforting. He wasn't one for idle conversation, and Luke seemed to intuitively grasp this, focusing on the task without attempting to fill the air with small talk. The early sun was now climbing higher, casting elongated shadows across the pavement. Adrian shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the morning chill and his continued awkwardness beside his stalled car. He glanced around. The shop wasn't merely a garage. A small waiting area was visible through a large grimy window. A few plastic chairs, a coffee machine, and a stack of old magazines. It looked lived in. "Hey!" Luke's voice broke the quiet, slightly muffled from under the hood. "You can head inside if you like. Coffee's brewing, probably stale, but it's hot. Might be a bit." Adrian hesitated. The idea of occupying a strange waiting room, nursing tepid coffee, wasn't exactly appealing. But standing exposed out here wasn't much better. "Okay. Thank you." He walked towards the side door, feeling Luke's gaze on his back for a moment before disappearing into the shop's dim interior. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying faint notes of stale coffee and dust. He located the promised coffee machine, a relic from another era, and poured himself a cup. It was indeed strong and a touch bitter, but it served to warm his hands. He settled into one of the plastic chairs, careful to minimize noise. Through the window, he could still see Luke's head bent over the engine. The mechanic was a portrait of focused intensity, his brow furrowed, his hands moving with a fluid grace that belied their size. Adrian watched him, a strange sense of calm settling over him. Despite the unexpected disruption to his day, despite the looming expense of repairs, there was something about Luke's presence, his quiet competence, that soothed Adrian's anxieties. He felt a flicker of something akin to admiration. It was a rare sensation for Adrian, who typically preferred to maintain his distance, to observe from afar. But here, in this unexpected moment, he found himself drawn in, a silent witness to a man deeply absorbed in his craft. The sputtering start to his day had, perhaps unpredictably, landed him exactly where he needed to be. A brush of hands, the familiar hum of the garage, a symphony of air wrenches and distant clanging, was muted by the office door. Adrian sat on a surprisingly comfortable plastic chair, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in his hands. Watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight slicing through the grimy window. He'd half expected a sales pitch for new tires or a full engine overhaul, but Luke had simply said, "Give me a few hours, Adrian. I'll see what I can do." Hours stretched into the better part of the afternoon. Adrian had spent it trying to read, failing to focus, and occasionally glancing at the heavy garage door, wondering what mechanical mysteries were unfolding beyond it. He'd even drifted off once, startled awake by the clang of metal on concrete from the shop floor. Now, a soft knock on the office door preceded Luke's entrance. Luke wiped grease from his hands with a rag, though his face was already clean. He leaned against the doorframe, radiating a quiet competence that Adrian found both reassuring and slightly intimidating. "All right, Adrian. She's good to go." Adrian set his coffee cup down, a small ripple disturbing the surface. "Really? That was quick." Luke shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just a few things out of alignment, a frayed wire here and there, nothing a little elbow grease and a steady hand couldn't fix. The fuel line was a bit kinked too, probably why she was sputtering. He explained it simply, without condescension, breaking down the complex mechanics into easily digestible pieces. Adrian, despite his limited knowledge of engines, found himself understanding, visualizing the repairs. He appreciated the clarity, the lack of jargon. "How much do I owe you?" Adrian asked, reaching for his wallet. He braced himself for a hefty sum, remembering past encounters with mechanics who seemed to speak in dollar signs. Luke named a figure that was surprisingly reasonable, even lower than Adrian had anticipated. Just for the parts and a couple hours of labor, no sense in overcharging for something that was a fairly straightforward fix. A wave of relief, coupled with genuine gratitude, washed over Adrian. He pulled out his card, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced since his car had coughed its last gasp. "Thank you, Luke. Truly, I really appreciate it." Luke nodded, pushing a small worn card reader across the desk. "No problem. Glad I could help." His gaze was steady, calm. Adrian swiped his card, inputting his PIN. The machine whirred softly before confirming the transaction. He looked up, and Luke was already holding out Adrian's car keys. They were polished clean, the dull metal gleaming under the fluorescent light, almost as if they'd been cleaned too. As Adrian reached for them, their fingers brushed. It was a fleeting contact, barely a second, yet it was enough. A small, unexpected jolt, like static electricity on a cold day, passed between them. Adrian's breath hitched, just perceptibly. He felt the warmth of Luke's skin, the slight roughness of his calloused fingertips. His gaze darted to Luke's face, catching the briefest flicker of something in the mechanic's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a momentary curiosity that mirrored his own. Luke didn't pull his hand away immediately, allowing the contact to linger for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. His thumb almost imperceptibly grazed Adrian's knuckles before he released the keys. The air in the small office seemed to thicken, charged with an unarticulated energy. Adrian clutched the keys, the cool metal feeling suddenly very warm in his palm. He cleared his throat, feeling a blush creep up his neck. "Well," he managed, the words sounding a little too loud in the sudden quiet. I should get going. Thanks again, Luke." Luke's smile was softer now, a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "Drive safe, Adrian." Adrian nodded, avoiding eye contact as he quickly gathered his things. He mumbled a hurried goodbye and practically fled the office, the door swinging shut behind him with a gentle click. Outside, the late afternoon sun was a mellow gold, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Adrian's car sat gleaming, as if newly washed, parked neatly by the garage door. He unlocked it, the familiar click sounding like a welcome invitation. As he slid into the driver's seat, the scent of oil and clean upholstery filled the air. He started the engine, and it purred to life instantly, a smooth, confident hum that was a stark contrast to its earlier struggles. He gripped the steering wheel, his fingers still tingling from the brush with Luke's hand. He told himself it was just a normal reaction, a momentary awkwardness. But as he pulled out of the lot, glancing back at Luke's fix-it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more profound had just transpired in that small, dust-filled office. The brush of hands had left an imprint, a warmth that settled deep within him, hinting at a connection he hadn't anticipated and couldn't quite explain. He found himself wondering if Luke had felt it too. The first excuse. The familiar whir of the old refrigerator was the loudest sound in Adrian's apartment, a comforting hum that usually accompanied his evenings of quiet reading. He'd just settled into his worn armchair, a mug of chamomile tea steaming beside him, when his phone buzzed on the end table. A number he didn't recognize flashed on the screen. He hesitated, usually wary of unknown callers, but something nudged him to answer. "Hello?" he said, his voice a little softer than he intended. "Adrian, it's Luke Miller from Miller's Auto." The voice was deep, warm, and instantly recognizable. Adrian felt a sudden warmth spread through his chest, a surprising reaction that made him blink. "Luke?" "Oh, hi," Adrian replied, a faint smile touching his lips. He hadn't expected to hear from him, not after just picking up the car yesterday. He thought about the fleeting touch of their hands, the jolt that had arced between them, and wondered if Luke had felt it too. "Just calling to check in on the old beast," Luke continued, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Wanted to make sure everything's still running smoothly. No new rattles, no funny smells." Adrian chuckled softly. "No, nothing like that. It's actually running better than it has in years. Like a completely different car." He meant it. The engine hummed with a quiet power he hadn't known it possessed. The ride smooth and responsive. "Good to hear," Luke said. And Adrian could almost picture the focused set of his brow, the slight crinkle at the corner of his eyes when he concentrated. Sometimes those older models can surprise you with a new quirk after a major repair. "Just wanted to be proactive. Make sure you weren't stranded somewhere." "That's very thoughtful of you, Luke," Adrian said, genuinely touched. Most mechanics, once the bill was paid, were done. This was a new level of care. "Honestly, I appreciate it. It's been perfect." There was a brief, comfortable silence on the line, punctuated only by the distant sounds of Luke's shop. A muffled clang, the low thrum of an air compressor. Adrian found himself wishing the call wouldn't end. He wanted to ask Luke something, anything, just to keep him talking. What was he working on? Had he had a good day? The questions felt too forward, too personal for a simple check-in call. "All right. Well, as long as it's purring," Luke finally said, his voice still holding that easy, approachable quality. "Don't hesitate to call if anything feels off, even a little bit. That's what I'm here for." "I will," Adrian promised, a sense of quiet contentment settling over him. He knew, deep down, that this call wasn't just about the car. It was about something else, something unspoken but palpable. "Great. Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Luke." Adrian slowly lowered the phone, the screen going dark. He stared at the blank display for a moment, then looked around his quiet living room. The air felt different, lighter. A small, involuntary smile spread across his face, lingering even as he picked up his book. He didn't read, though. Instead, his mind replayed the conversation, dissecting each word, each inflection, just calling to check in on the old beast. Wanted to make sure everything's still running smoothly. A perfectly plausible excuse, yes, but Adrian knew it was more. It was an olive branch, a subtle reaching out, and he was glad Luke had. Miles away, in the dim light of his office at Miller's Auto, Luke hung up his own phone. He leaned back in his chair, the worn leather creaking softly. The shop was quiet now, the tools put away, the bay doors locked. He usually left right after the last car rolled out, eager for the silence of his own home. But tonight, he'd lingered. He told himself he needed to finish some paperwork, to organize invoices. Yet, the moment Adrian's number had appeared on his contact list, saved under Adrian Finch, Sedan, he'd felt a surprising impulse. Just check on the car, he'd thought. Professional courtesy. But as he dialed, he knew it wasn't just that. He'd found himself picturing Adrian's kind eyes, the slight hesitation in his voice, the way his fingers had brushed Luke's, cool and soft when he'd taken the keys. He'd felt a spark then, a strange, quickening pulse that had caught him off guard. Now, a faint smile played on Luke's lips. The car was fine, of course. He'd known it would be. He was a good mechanic. But hearing Adrian's voice, the genuine surprise and pleasure in it, had been gratifying. He pushed away from his desk, the smile still there, a quiet warmth in his chest. It was a good feeling, a curious new sensation that had nothing to do with engine oil or torque wrenches. He locked the office door behind him, the smile still in place as he stepped out into the cool night air. A visit to the neighborhood. The late afternoon sun, already softening towards gold, painted Adrian's living room in warm hues as he settled onto the sofa with a book. A faint vibration hummed from the pavement outside, growing steadily louder until a familiar rumble resolved into the distinct purr of Luke's truck. Adrian looked up, a flicker of surprise, then something warmer crossing his face. He watched through the sheer curtain as the dark blue Ford F-150 pulled up to the curb, not quite opposite his house, but close enough. Luke, wrench clutched loosely in one hand, emerged from the driver's side. His denim work shirt stretched across broad shoulders. He scanned the street with a practiced casualness that didn't quite mask the intent focus in his eyes as they landed on Adrian's house. He adjusted the brim of his cap, then strode with a purposeful gait up the path, his boots crunching on the gravel. A knock, firm but not insistent, sounded at the door. Adrian took a slow breath, setting his book aside before answering. "Luke?" Adrian's voice was a little softer than he intended. Luke grinned, a flash of white teeth against the shadow of his beard. "Hey, Adrian. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Thought I'd swing by and give those brakes another once-over. You know, just to be sure." He gestured vaguely with the wrench. "Heard a funny little squeal from a car a few blocks back, got me thinking." Adrian's car had no squeal. It was, in fact, remarkably quiet. He knew Luke knew this. The unspoken understanding hung in the air, a delicate thread between them. "Right," Adrian said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Well, come on in. It's pretty warm out there. You must be thirsty." Luke's eyes, a surprisingly deep shade of blue, met Adrian's. The grin softened. "Yeah, a glass of water would hit the spot. Thanks." He stepped inside, bringing with him the faint scent of grease and something clean, like soap. The air in Adrian's entryway, usually still and quiet, seemed to hum with a new energy. Adrian led him to the kitchen, a bright, uncluttered space. As he filled a glass with ice water, the clinking sound seemed amplified in the sudden quiet. Luke leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "Nice place you got here, Adrian. Always liked these older homes. Good bones." "Thanks," Adrian replied, handing him the glass. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt, not unpleasant, through Adrian's arm. Luke took a long drink, his gaze sweeping over the polished countertops and the small herb garden by the window. "So, no squeals, huh?" Luke finally asked, setting the empty glass on the counter. He walked over to the front door, glancing out at Adrian's car. "Well, it's good to be thorough. Can't be too careful with brakes." He paused, then tilted his head. "Though, now that I look, is that headlight a little dim on the passenger side? Might be a loose connection." Adrian followed him out to the driveway. He hadn't noticed any dimness, but Luke was already kneeling beside the front bumper, his head disappearing under the hood. The sounds of gentle tinkering, a soft click, a scrape, filled the air. "Been a long day," Luke murmured, his voice a little muffled. Had an old pickup come in this morning. Carburetor was shot. Took me half the day to track down the right part. These old models, they're stubborn, but satisfying when you get 'em running right. Adrian leaned against the car, listening. He enjoyed the low hum of Luke's voice, the way he talked about his work with a quiet passion. It was clear Luke loved what he did, a dedication Adrian understood and admired. He found himself studying the strong line of Luke's jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead as he bent over the engine. And then, Luke continued, his voice closer now as he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag from his back pocket. This lady, Mrs. Henderson, she brought in her Civic. Swears up and down her oil light is on. But I checked it, Adrian. That thing's full to the brim. Turns out she just changed the oil herself and forgot to reset the warning light. He chuckled, a warm, resonant sound. People and their cars, eh? Always something. Adrian smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile. Sounds like you have your hands full. Luke nodded, his gaze lingering on Adrian's face. Comes with the territory, but it's never boring. Always a new puzzle to solve. He paused, then stepped back, surveying the car. There, see? That headlight's definitely brighter now. Must have been a loose wire, just like I thought. Adrian squinted. He honestly couldn't tell the difference, but he didn't say anything. He liked the idea that Luke had fixed something, even if it was imaginary. It was an excuse to stay, to talk, to just be there. Luke finally leaned against the fender, turning to face Adrian fully. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows. So, what about you? Good day. Get much reading done? Adrian felt a blush creep up his neck. Just a quiet afternoon. Yes, got through a few chapters. It's a good one. He hesitated, then, emboldened by the easy camaraderie, added, Want to tell me about your carburetor woes over another glass of water? Or maybe something stronger? Luke's eyes widened slightly, a surprised pleasure blooming in them. Something stronger, huh? Tempting. But I should probably get going. Got a few more calls to make before I head home. He pushed off the car, but didn't move towards his truck. He just stood there, watching Adrian, a faint smile playing on his lips. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken question, a mutual pull. The brakes were fine. The headlight was fine. But something else was definitely shifting. Cookies and conversations. The excuse this time was the tire pressure. A week after his impromptu visit, Luke called, his voice a low rumble over the phone. Just thought I'd swing by, Adrian. Make sure everything's optimal. You know, with the weather shifts, tires can be finicky. Adrian, who had been half expecting a call, or perhaps even a knock on his door, agreed with a quiet assent that belied the faint flutter in his chest. Luke arrived an hour later. His blue work shirt stretched taut across his shoulders, carrying a small portable air compressor. The scent of oil and something vaguely metallic clung to him, a strangely comforting aroma. As Luke knelt beside the front wheel, the low thrum of the compressor filling the quiet afternoon, Adrian found himself leaning against the doorframe, watching. He noticed the strong line of Luke's jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead as he concentrated. All good here, Luke announced, straightening up, a faint smudge of grease on his cheek. You'd be surprised how many folks neglect their tires until they're flat. I tried to keep on top of things, Adrian replied, pushing himself off the doorframe. Though I admit, I sometimes forget the small details. Their conversation, which began with cars, soon meandered. They discussed the recent unseasonable rain, the local news, and then, surprisingly, Adrian's fledgling attempt at growing herbs on his kitchen windowsill. Luke listened with an easy attentiveness, occasionally interjecting with a humorous anecdote about his own ill-fated gardening attempts. He spoke of his childhood, growing up in a small, bustling family, a stark contrast to Adrian's own quiet upbringing. Adrian, in turn, found himself sharing snippets of his work as a freelance editor, the peculiar satisfaction of untangling complex sentences, and his fondness for old books. The afternoon light softened, stretching long shadows across the driveway, but neither man seemed eager to break the spell. Luke finally excused himself with a lingering glance and a promise to check in again soon. And check in he did. The visits became more frequent, the excuses less elaborate. A quick check of the oil, a mysterious rattle he thought he heard, a new brand of windshield wiper fluid he wanted Adrian to try. Adrian didn't question it. He found himself looking forward to the sound of Luke's truck pulling up, the easy rhythm of their conversations. He started leaving the garage door unlocked, a subtle invitation. One Tuesday, Adrian was baking. The kitchen was warm, fragrant with cinnamon and vanilla. He'd decided to try a new recipe for oatmeal raisin cookies, something comforting and not overly sweet. He was pulling a golden brown tray from the oven when he heard the familiar rumble of Luke's truck. A moment later, Luke's knock resonated through the house. Adrian, just wanted to drop off this brochure on synthetic oils I thought you might find interesting. He sounded almost sheepish. Adrian opened the door, a faint flush on his cheeks from the oven's heat. Come in, Luke. I just pulled a batch of cookies out. Luke's eyes, which had initially been fixed on Adrian's, widened slightly as he took in the warm kitchen and the scent of baking. Cookies, huh? My weakness? He grinned, a boyish, unreserved expression that made Adrian smile in return. Adrian gestured towards the cooling rack. Help yourself. They're still warm. Luke didn't hesitate. He picked up a cookie, taking a large, appreciative bite. Wow, Adrian, these are incredible. Seriously, better than any I've had from a bakery. A warmth spread through Adrian, more potent than the oven's heat. He watched Luke, captivated by the simple, genuine pleasure on his face. Luke took another cookie, then another, crumbs dusting his chin. He talked about his day, about a particularly stubborn engine he'd wrestled with, all while steadily working his way through Adrian's fresh batch. Adrian found himself feeling a contentment he hadn't realized he was missing. It was a comfortable, easy domesticity that settled between them, unspoken yet palpable. As Luke finally wiped his hands and stood to leave, a small pile of crumbs remaining on the counter, he looked at Adrian. You know, he said, his voice softer than usual, you're a really good baker, Adrian. The compliment, simple as it was, felt like a promise. Tea and unspoken words. Since dawn, the sky had wept without cease, a drumming downpour that blurred the edges of Adrian's garden into a watery tableau. Luke, ostensibly there for a follow-up check on the car's new sensor, found himself marooned in Adrian's living room, the sheeting rain precluding any immediate departure. He'd barely crossed the threshold before Adrian, a soft, almost apologetic smile playing on his lips, gestured towards the window. Looks like you're grounded for a bit. Care for some tea? The simple offer, unadorned, hinted at something far more profound than a mere beverage. Luke, shoulders still damp from his dash across the driveway, found himself nodding before the words fully left Adrian's mouth. That would be wonderful, Adrian. Thanks. Minutes later, the comforting chime of ceramic on saucers punctuated the quiet room, a counterpoint to the rhythmic drumming against the window panes. Adrian returned with a tray bearing 2 steaming mugs and a small plate of shortbread, freshly baked that morning. The fragrance of Darjeeling intertwined with the sweet, buttery aroma, creating an unexpected haven of warmth against the monochrome afternoon. They settled into the worn armchairs, facing each other across the low coffee table. The silence that descended wasn't awkward. It was companionable, a space for shared breathing and the gentle contemplation of the storm. Luke took a grateful sip of his tea, its warmth radiating through him. "This is excellent," he murmured, almost to himself. Adrian offered another subtle smile. "My grandmother's blend. She always insisted a good cup of tea could unravel most knots." He paused, his gaze drifting to the towering bookshelf that dominated one wall. "Speaking of unraveling, or at least exploring, what kind of books capture your interest, Luke?" The question caught Luke off guard. His reading tended toward the pragmatic, manuals, technical guides, or the occasional airport thriller. He rarely categorized them by kind. But Adrian's eyes, quiet and expectant, invited candor. Mostly non-fiction, I suppose. Mechanics, engineering, sometimes a detective novel if I'm killing time." A flush crept up his neck, suddenly aware of how utilitarian his interests sounded next to the literary landscape Adrian clearly inhabited. Adrian, however, merely nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. There's a unique satisfaction in deciphering how things operate, isn't there? The logic, the precision. He took a slow sip of his own tea. "I, conversely, often lose myself in fiction. Narratives that construct entire universes or meticulously peel back the strata of human experience." He gestured vaguely at the shelves. "Everything from sweeping historical sagas to existential philosophy. I find it illuminates why people act as they do, even if the characters are imagined." "So, like escaping?" Luke ventured, attempting to bridge the chasm between their worlds. Adrian considered this. "Partly, yes, but also connecting, discovering fragments of yourself in someone else's prose, or grasping perspectives you'd never encounter in your own life. It's a form of sedentary travel." He picked up a slim, leather-bound volume from the side table. This one, for example, "The Remains of the Day" by Kazuo Ishiguro. It concerns a butler Stevens and his life of dedicated service. Ostensibly a quiet tale, it's profoundly about duty, regret, unspoken emotions. It's devastatingly beautiful. He held the book out, not quite offering it, but presenting it, as if sharing a confidence. Luke accepted the book, the leather cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. He traced the embossed title. He'd never encountered it, never would have chosen it himself. Yet, as Adrian described it, a strange resonance stirred within him. Unspoken feelings, duty. He thought of his own existence, the meticulous compartments he'd always maintained, the expectations he'd invariably fulfilled. He thought of the increasingly flimsy pretexts he'd concocted to see Adrian, the magnetic pull he felt toward this gentle man and his tranquil home. It wasn't about mending a car anymore. It hadn't been for quite some time. He looked up from the book, his gaze meeting Adrian's across the fragrant steam of their tea. Adrian's eyes held a gentle curiosity, an openness Luke realized he'd rarely, if ever, encountered. Not from friends, not from past partners. There was no judgment, no presumption, merely a willingness to see and to comprehend. In that moment, with the rain drumming a steady cadence outside and the scent of tea and aged paper perfuming the air, a profound understanding settled over Luke. This wasn't merely a pleasant afternoon. This transcended mere friendship. This quiet man, with his thoughtful words and unassuming kindness, was revealing a different mode of existence, an alternate path to connection. He had never felt so truly seen, so genuinely engaged by anyone before. It was a connection that resonated in a place he hadn't known existed within him. And the realization, warm and unsettling all at once, was that he didn't want it to end. Not ever. He wanted to understand Adrian's worlds, both the fictional and the real, as deeply as Adrian seemed to understand his. He wanted to continue peeling back the layers. Confusion and distance. The faint, familiar scent of Adrian's Earl Grey, a subtle anchor, now wove itself into Luke's every thought of the man, thoughts that were no longer stray, but constant and insistent. He found himself replaying their last conversation, not for the specifics of the car, but for the melodic cadence of Adrian's voice, the thoughtful inclination of his head, the way his eyes softened at the corners when he smiled. These weren't the meticulous observations of a mechanic. They were something else entirely. A knot of confusion tightened in Luke's gut. He'd always navigated the world through the familiar lens of heterosexual attraction, a comfort he'd never questioned. Yet, Adrian exerted a different kind of pull, an inexplicable gravitational force that bypassed his usual pathways of desire. It wasn't about physical appearance in the conventional sense. It was deeper, rooted in Adrian's quiet intelligence and gentle spirit. He felt genuinely seen by Adrian, a profound connection he hadn't experienced before. This revelation was both exhilarating and unsettling. He tried to dismiss it as a temporary anomaly, a strange offshoot of an unusual friendship. He was a straight man. He dated women. Simple as that. But the confusion persisted, a low hum beneath the surface of his routine. His thumb would hover over Adrian's contact, the impulse to call strong, but always thwarted by the lack of a plausible excuse. The car was impeccable. He'd seen to that himself. Tire pressure checked, fluids topped, even a preemptive tire rotation. His reservoir of justifications was running dry, and the thought of calling without one, merely to hear Adrian's voice, felt like an admission he wasn't prepared to make. One Friday evening, still grappling with this unfamiliar emotional terrain, Luke sought refuge in the known. He called Sarah, a vivacious ex-girlfriend from the previous year. Her infectious energy and undeniable beauty, he reasoned, would recalibrate his internal compass. He picked her up, the heady floral of her perfume filling the truck's cab. They settled into a bustling Italian trattoria, alive with red and white checks and boisterous laughter. Sarah, animated, recounted her week, her hand occasionally resting on his arm, her eyes dancing under the warm light. Luke offered practiced nods, smiles, and laughter. He even found a detached enjoyment in the evening, but a vital element was missing. As Sarah spoke of her new job, her upcoming travels, her plans with friends, Luke's mind wandered. He heard her words, yet his presence felt attenuated. He thought of Adrian's focused intensity when discussing a book, his deep, attentive listening, the subtle shifts in his expression that conveyed so much more than mere words. He recalled the comfortable silence in Adrian's living room, a silence not empty, but rich with unspoken understanding. Sarah's once infectious laughter now struck him as a touch too loud, a beat too forced. Her stories, while entertaining, lacked the depth he now craved. It wasn't Sarah's fault. She was precisely as he remembered her. The fault, he realized with a jolt, lay entirely with him. He was searching for something absent, something Adrian had unwittingly awakened within him. He was comparing, and Sarah, for all her charm, couldn't measure up to the quiet intimacy he'd discovered with a man he was simply supposed to service. The date concluded with a polite, perfunctory kiss at her door, a kiss that felt hollow, empty. He drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past, his earlier confusion now coalescing into a dull ache. The date hadn't reset his compass. It had spun it irrevocably off course. He awoke the next morning shrouded in a heavy disquiet. The image of Adrian, tea in hand, recommending the remains of the day, stubbornly persisted. Luke wrestled with the profound warm feelings for Adrian and his long-held self-perception. The dissonance was immense, the implications terrifying. He needed space. He needed to unravel this emotional tangle to regain his footing. So, he withdrew. The calls stopped. The impromptu visits ceased. He no longer invented reasons to drive past Adrian's street. His silence was deliberate, a self-imposed exile. Each passing day without contact felt like a small victory against the tide of his feelings. Yet simultaneously, a quiet defeat. He rationalized it as necessary. This uncharted territory dangerous, a protective measure for himself and perhaps Adrian from something he couldn't comprehend. The distance was a clumsy shield, and with every passing day, the weight of Adrian's absence grew heavier than the confusion that had prompted its creation. Adrian's number remained in his phone, a constant, silent reproach. He just couldn't bring himself to call. Not yet. Maybe not ever. A real flat tire. The sharp, rhythmic thudding started subtly, a discordant percussion against the usual hum of Adrian's morning commute. He'd barely registered it, chalking it up to a loose manhole cover or a particularly rough patch of asphalt. But then the steering wheel gave a gentle shudder, a vibration that felt less like the road and more like something fundamentally wrong with his vehicle. He glanced at the dashboard, then down at the wheel, his brow furrowing. The thud grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a faint, breathy hiss. "Oh, for heaven's sake," he muttered, pulling over into the gravel shoulder with a sigh that tasted of resignation. He knew, before he even stepped out, what he would find. A quick visual confirmed it. The passenger side rear tire was deflating with a slow, agonizing finality, its once proud sidewall now sagging against the rim like a tired old man. He stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, surveying the unfortunate scene. The sky was a pale, indifferent blue, and the morning air held a crisp chill that belied the growing frustration in his chest. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he pulled it out, scrolling through his contacts. There was only one name he considered. He dialed the shop's number, the familiar ringtone echoing in his ear. A gruff, unfamiliar voice answered. "Miller's Auto." "Hi, I need to speak with Luke, please," Adrian said, a slight tremor in his voice that he couldn't quite control. There was a pause, a rustle of paper, then Luke's voice, sounding a little rough. "Miller here." "Luke, it's Adrian. Adrian Finch," he clarified, though he suspected Luke would know his voice instantly. I seem to have a flat tire, a genuine one this time." He tried for a lightness he didn't feel. Silence stretched between them, thick and palpable, until Adrian wondered if the connection had dropped. Then, Luke's voice, devoid of its usual warmth, came through. "Where are you?" Adrian gave him the cross streets, feeling a cold knot form in his stomach. The flat tire was an inconvenience, but the icy tone in Luke's voice was a punch to the gut. Can you come out?" "Yeah, give me 20, Luke said, and the line clicked dead. 20 minutes stretched into nearly 40. Adrian leaned against the hood of his car, watching the sparse traffic. When Luke's familiar tow truck finally rumbled into view, Adrian felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Luke climbed out, his face unreadable, shielded by the brim of his baseball cap. He wore a dark blue work shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with muscle, but his usual easygoing posture was replaced by a stiff formality. He didn't meet Adrian's gaze, instead focusing on the deflated tire with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. "Got a good nail in there," Luke stated, his voice flat, as he knelt beside the wheel, his movements efficient and precise. He pulled out a small jack, the rhythmic squeak of the mechanism, the only sound breaking the silence between them. He didn't ask if Adrian was okay, didn't make any of his usual observations about the weather or the state of the world. He just worked. Adrian watched him, a hollow ache growing in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But the words felt lodged in his throat, unable to dislodge. The quiet was oppressive, filled with the weight of unspoken things. Every quick glance Luke darted away from him felt like a physical barrier. The spare tire was on quickly, secured with practiced ease. Luke began packing up his tools, still avoiding eye contact. Adrian finally found his voice, a little hoarse. "Thanks, Luke. How much do I owe you?" Luke straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. And finally, for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. There was a flicker of something unreadable in Luke's gaze. Confusion? Pain? Adrian couldn't tell. Luke quickly looked away, staring at a distant point on the horizon. "Don't worry about it," Luke mumbled, his voice so low Adrian almost missed it. He slammed the back of his truck shut, the sound echoing harshly. "Luke, wait," Adrian tried, stepping forward. Luke turned, his expression guarded, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Look, Adrian," he began, his voice strained. I just need some space, okay?" The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. They weren't a question, but a plea, a demand. Adrian felt his shoulders slump. The ache in his chest intensified, spreading to his throat. He just nodded, unable to speak. Luke climbed back into his truck, the engine roaring to life. He didn't look back as he pulled away, leaving Adrian standing alone on the shoulder of the road, the faint scent of oil and gasoline lingering in the air, a melancholic reminder of a connection that had, for some inexplicable reason, gone flat, the ache of absence. The silence in Luke's garage, once a comfortable hum of industry and camaraderie, had begun to feel hollow. Weeks had bled into each other since the flat tire incident, each day a slow, grinding reminder of Adrian's absence. Luke found himself staring at the phone, fingers hovering over Adrian's number countless times, only to pull back. The memory of Adrian's quiet gaze, the gentle tilt of his head when listening, the subtle curve of his lips in a nascent smile. They were constant companions in his thoughts, unwelcome and yet deeply cherished. He missed the easy rhythm of their conversations, the way Adrian would pick up on a half-formed thought and complete it with surprising insight. He missed the quiet comfort of Adrian's presence, the feeling of something settled and right that had filled his chest whenever Adrian was near. Now, that space was an ache, a dull throb that underscored every interaction, every task, even the familiar grease and oil, once a soothing balm of routine, felt somehow less satisfying. The camaraderie with his co-workers, usually a source of easy banter, seemed to fall flat. He'd catch himself mid-sentence, realizing he was about to share some trivial observation that just weeks ago he would have saved for Adrian. One particularly restless Tuesday, after a long day wrestling with a stubborn transmission, Luke found himself driving aimlessly. The city lights blurred past, a kaleidoscope of distant, unfeeling brightness. His usual route home felt alien, and without conscious decision, his truck turned down a familiar street. The oak trees, now shedding their leaves in the crisp autumn air, lined the road leading to Adrian's house. He slowed, his heart a tight knot in his chest. A warm glow emanated from Adrian's living room window, a soft rectangle of light against the encroaching darkness. He imagined Adrian inside, perhaps reading one of the weighty books Luke had glimpsed on his shelves, or listening to the classical music he sometimes mentioned. A pang of longing, sharp and undeniable, pierced through him. It wasn't just physical attraction, though Adrian's quiet grace had certainly stirred something primal within him. It was a deeper yearning, a need for connection, for the unique solace he'd found in Adrian's company. He pulled over a few houses down, cutting the engine, plunging his truck into a sudden, profound quiet, broken only by the chirping of crickets. The light in Adrian's window seemed to beckon, a lighthouse in a storm he hadn't known he was weathering. He realized then, with a jolt that went through him like an electric current, that his fear, his sudden withdrawal, had been born of a terrifying understanding. This wasn't just a fleeting interest, a casual friendship. This was something profound, something that had rearranged the very landscape of his heart. All his life, he'd followed a script, dated women, built a certain kind of future in his mind. Adrian had shattered that script, not with a dramatic declaration, but with quiet smiles and shared moments that had somehow burrowed under his skin, settling into the deepest parts of him. The ache he felt wasn't just missing a friend. It was the pain of a love unacknowledged, a bond severed by his own hand. A car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the interior of his truck, startling him from his reverie. He watched the light in Adrian's window for a few more minutes, a silent vigil. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, clearing his head. The realization settled over him, heavy and absolute. He was in love with Adrian Finch. The words, unspoken, hung in the confined space of his truck, powerful and undeniable. His earlier fear now seemed foolish, a flimsy shield against a truth too beautiful to deny. He couldn't live with this ache, this gnawing emptiness. He needed Adrian, not just in his life, but with him, in the way he now understood. He started the truck, the engine roaring to life, a definitive sound in the quiet night. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, what he had to do. He had to go back. He had to tell Adrian everything. A clear confession. The dawn, a low hazy blush, stretched long shadows across Adrian's immaculate lawn as Luke ascended the porch steps. His heart hammered a frantic, percussive warning against his ribs, a prelude to confession. He raised his hand, a tremor skipping through his knuckles, and knocked. A precise rap, neither timid nor demanding. He swallowed, the sudden parchedness of his throat a sharp echo of his anxiety. Agonizing seconds ticked by. Luke raked a hand through his hair, then smoothed his shirt, an automatic gesture born of raw nerves. Sleep had been a stranger, Adrian's gentle, observant eyes haunting his restless hours. The words, so carefully rehearsed in the quiet dark of his apartment, now felt fragile, inadequate for the truth they bore. Then, the distinct click of the lock, and the door swung open. Adrian stood framed in the doorway, a book still clutched in one hand, his expression a blend of surprise and something akin to burgeoning hope. He wore a soft grey Henley that subtly outlined his lean physique, his hair appealingly disheveled, as if he'd been lost in thought or perhaps just roused from slumber. His perceptive, intelligent eyes widened slightly, meeting Luke's. Luke? Adrian's voice was a soft inquiry, hanging delicately between them. Is everything all right? Did you forget something yesterday? A fleeting guardedness flickered in his gaze, a hint of the polite distance that had characterized their initial encounters, pre-flat tire, pre-shared silences in the garage. Luke drew a deep breath, the crisp morning air doing little to quell the inferno in his chest. This was it. No retreat. He needed to be unequivocally clear. No more evasion or flimsy excuses. No, Adrian, he began, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor that still ran through him. He cleared his throat, pushing past the sudden constriction. I didn't forget anything. I came back for a reason. He shifted his weight, his gaze momentarily dropping to his scuffed boots before he forced himself to meet Adrian's eyes squarely. Adrian's gaze searched his, a slow dawning of comprehension blooming in their depths. The book in his hand lowered almost imperceptibly. He remained silent, his stillness a patient invitation for Luke to continue. Look, Adrian, Luke started again, the words now a torrent, as if a long-held dam had finally burst. I know this is out of nowhere, and I know I've been a mess, confused, and I pulled away, and I'm so sorry for that. I shouldn't have. It was cowardly. He caught a brief flash in Adrian's eyes, perhaps hurt, swiftly veiled by that quiet reserve. That flicker only spurred Luke on. But I understand why now. I understand why I kept inventing reasons to return. Why I kept trying to see you. Why I felt utterly lost when you weren't around. He paused, gathering himself, his gaze unwavering. Adrian's lips parted slightly, but he still didn't speak. His entire focus fixed on Luke. Adrian, Luke continued, the name a soft exhalation. The truth is, I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable between them. Luke watched Adrian's face, searching for any reaction, any sign. Adrian's eyes, usually so composed, now held a profound vulnerability. A faint blush crept up his neck, dusting his cheeks. His hand, still clutching the book, trembled. I know it's a lot. Luke rushed on, their emotional floodgates now fully open. And I know it's probably not what you expected. Hell, it's not what I expected. My whole life, I thought I knew what I wanted, who I was. And then you appeared, with your quiet insights, your stories about your garden, your inherent kindness, and everything just shifted. He instinctively took a step closer, needing to bridge the small gap between them. I've never felt anything like this, Adrian. This connection. This sense that when I'm with you, everything else simply fades. And when I'm not, there's this ache, this profound absence. I tried to ignore it. I tried to push it away because it terrified me. It was new, unfamiliar, and it challenged every preconceived notion I had about myself. But I can't ignore it anymore. Luke reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently cupping Adrian's cheek. Adrian leaned into the touch, his eyelids fluttering closed for a brief second before opening again to meet Luke's, shining now with a mixture of wonder and unshed tears. I love the way you perceive the world, Luke whispered, his thumb stroking Adrian's soft skin. I love your quiet strength. I love how you truly listen. I love your dry humor, even when you try to conceal it. I love everything about you, Adrian Finch. Adrian's breath hitched. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. He made no move to wipe it away. His free hand, the one not holding the book, slowly rose to cover Luke's on his face. Their fingers intertwined, a silent testament to the fragile, beautiful moment unfolding. I know I made a mistake pulling away, Luke reiterated, his voice thick with emotion. But I promise you, I won't do it again. I want to be here, with you, if you'll have me. The morning light intensified, bathing them in a soft, ethereal glow. Adrian's gaze, though still tear-filled, held a newfound clarity, a profound depth of feeling mirroring Luke's own. The quiet gardener and the rugged mechanic, standing on a porch, bathed in the dawn, with a confession hanging in the air, like the sweetest perfume. The long, slow burn had at last ignited,